At the Mayo Clinic, a smartwatch pulses on a patient's wrist. By tracking electrocardiogram data, artificial intelligence algorithms predict atrial fibrillation with over 80% probability before the patient feels a single symptom. That wearable data doesn't process locally. It routes wirelessly into massive distributed computing networks, utilizing tools like Hadoop to aggregate variables and calculate specific disease probability scores. We see this decentralized approach expanding through mobile health tools, from Bluetooth proximity tracing deployed during the COVID-19 pandemic to remote patient biosensors monitoring vitals from home. This flips the medical model. Instead of reacting to life-altering events like a stroke, clinicians are preemptively flagging at-risk individuals. Patient-centric care is the objective here. Yet these effortless clinical tools absolutely cannot function with a hidden, highly complex digital infrastructure. A patient sees a seamless app interface. The hospital, however, manages a colossal healthcare information system, or HIS, required to ingest, secure, and process that data stream. In this clinical context, big data means researchers rely on tens of millions of electronic patient records just to train the predictive algorithms. A mature HIS backbone is the non-negotiable prerequisite for deploying any machine learning tool or remote care node. To understand how modern clinical intelligence actually saves lives, we must deconstruct its architectural evolution, the psychology of its adoption, and the severe operational friction of healthcare IT. Healthcare computing originated in the 1960s and 70s, isolated within hospital data processing departments. Early mainframe hardware, like the systems funded by Lockheed Martin, were engineered strictly for charge capture patient billing. They were not designed for clinical care. By the 1980s, the transition to air-cooled mini-computers lowered infrastructure costs, allowing early adopters to implement local health information systems. These localized systems created fragmented silos. A hospital might buy best-of-breed software to manage specific departmental finances, but these programs were structurally incapable of supporting clinical analytics. In the 1990s, the Internet and HIPAA regulations finally forced standardized data security and external connectivity into the ecosystem. Because modern clinical networks are built atop architectures originally designed for accounting rather than patient care, inherent friction exists when deploying advanced clinical AI. This chart outlines the Electronic Medical Record Adoption Model, or EMRAM, the structural roadmap for measuring HIS maturity. At stages 0 through 3, basic clinical documentation remains isolated. Stage 7 demands external health information exchange and integrated data analytics. Achieving Stage 7 is the absolute prerequisite for deploying predictive AI dashboards or distributed computing nodes. The industry did not climb this ladder willingly. The 2009 HITECH Act utilized meaningful use incentive payments to force a fragmented sector upward. The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs had already executed a highly successful electronic health record rollout, serving as the primary proof of concept for this federal intervention. To manage this transition, professional organizations like HIMSS, AMIA, AHIMA, and ANI enforce the rigid standardization and informatics science required. Ascending the EMRAM ladder isn't just a software update. It is a massive capital and regulatory restructuring of how a hospital processes information. Why has an industry defined by cutting-edge medical science been markedly slower than other knowledge sectors to adopt information technology? This graph represents E.M. Rogers' 1962 theory of diffusion of innovation. It provides a psychological framework explaining how disruptive technologies penetrate the market. The innovators and early adopters on the left side of the curve initiate disruptive technological change. In healthcare, this initial adoption occurs in a tiny fraction of highly capitalized research organizations. Between 1995 and 2007, just 4 organizations published 25% of all HIS studies. Moving to the right, the early and late majority are cautious operators. They only adjust to automated work processes after innovations are thoroughly proven. The unique high-stress and high-stakes nature of the clinical environment justifies this vast delay between early innovators and the majority of practitioners. When the late majority is forced by federal mandates to adopt disruptive technologies before workflows are perfected, the resulting friction causes immediate organizational damage. Forcing rapid ERAM ascension has stark unintended consequences. Detection of automation's negative effects has severely lagged behind implementation. A Stanford report found that physicians now spend 62% of their time with a patient documenting in EHR systems. Survey data from Medscape and KLS reveals that less than half of physicians feel their electronic health records actually enable quality care. Current systems are dominated by assembly line workflows engineered for profit-minded vendors. This effectively transforms highly trained clinicians into data entry clerks. The safety implications are severe. A 2012 study indicated that 56% of medical errors are computer system related, a hazard exacerbated by hybrid paper-electronic environments. Mitigating this friction requires building HIS and informatics oversight directly into the curricula of medical and nursing schools to empower the end users. Dropping new technologies atop existing core systems fails. Technology must be carefully architected to augment human intelligence rather than obstruct it. Successful HIS adoption requires a total cultural evolution toward a knowledge-based healthcare economy, moving beyond the scope of a traditional IT installation. This transition relies on the dematerialization of information, separating critical clinical data from the physical objects in buildings historically used to house it. Dematerialization takes geography out of the equation, permanently ending the era of the centralized medical records room. The resulting organizational shift moves away from strict hierarchical configurations and into fluid, social, and adaptable flat networks. Accountable care organizations and medical homes utilize this flat architecture to pivot the industry focus from acute hospital care to lifelong personalized prevention. This long-term trajectory, originating in 1960s billing mainframes and culminating in predictive AI, repositions the patient as the primary node of a continuous network. As clinical intelligence dematerializes, the physical hospital recedes from its role as the sole repository of medical information.